Now, I don't think there's a cyclist in the world who hasn't crashed or had a bike nicked, which is where Laka bike insurance comes in. Now, I'm usually really skeptical about insurance companies. When you need them, it somehow feels like they'll do anything to avoid paying out your claim. And then your premium goes up and you still have to pay the excess. But Laka is genuinely different. There's no excess on approved claims and there's zero depreciation. Laka covers everything from a cracked wheel to emergency travel cash if you're stranded mid-ride. And if you say you've got a bent mech hanger, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. These guys, they're cyclists as well. There are no fixed contracts. You can pause, upgrade, or cancel your cover at any time. And what's more, each month, Laka adds up the total cost of the claims and divides it amongst the collective up to a capped amount, so you only pay your fair share. With their collective insurance model, Laka only makes money when they settle claims, so they're on your side to get you back on your bike. I've heard loads of great stories about Laka being genuinely decent, so it's no surprise they've been voted best cycle insurance provider 7 years in a row. So find out for yourself by heading over to laka.co/cyclist, that's laka.co/cyclist, and use the code CyclistMag at the checkout to get your first 30 days free. T's and C's apply. Laka, collective cover that goes further than you think.
Welcome back to another episode of the Cyclist Magazine Podcast. I'm Will Strickson. I'm joined today by the fabulous Robyn Davison. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing even better now you called me fabulous. That was really nice. Thanks, Will.
Well, Robyn, it is our pre-Tour de France special. So I say special, it's like every other episode, except we're talking quite exclusively about the Tour de France. We'll be joined very shortly by Ned Boulting. If you're listening to this and you don't know that this is ITV4's final Tour de France, I'll give you a second to, take that in. Obviously, Ned Boulting, ITV man, what he'll do next, we'll talk about in the interview, but obviously he's got a lot going on. He's more than just a commentator. He has also got a book out, which is already out now. So if you haven't already, what have you been doing? But you should buy it. It's called The Accidental Tour-ist, published by Bloomsbury. And it's final dispatches from the road. It's sort of a little subheading, but there's like brackets around final because as he explains, he was already writing it before they found out that they were getting kicked off the telly. Please welcome to the Cyclist Magazine Podcast, Ned Boulting. He's back again. For the last time, probably not, but in this, guys, maybe. Ned Boulting, how are you?
Okay, bit sweaty. Just been running. London's quite hot. So yeah, I'm just hydrating at my desk in London. Bit like you, I've got a glass of water on the go. If there's any slurping sounds, that's the reason.
Yeah. I went out for a run yesterday and I felt like it was a big mistake. I think I was seeing stars by the end. I was like, hey, let's just take it easy. We're just talking after you've completed your final Dauphiné highlights show for ITV. Yep. How was that? How does it feel? How does all the final ITV tour kicking in?
Oh well, it's a curious thing. It's both a celebration and a bit of a funeral dirge all at the same time. We're a close-knit team, and I am still, even though I'm approaching my 23rd Tour de France with ITV, there are still half a dozen members of the production team, as well as the main presenter, Gary Imlach, who predate my experience by a decade. So it's got real heritage, and there are people whose, number one, I suppose, whose livelihoods are going to be affected quite seriously, and number two, whose emotional livelihoods are going to be affected because it's a big part of their lives. So I think we're looking forward to the summer. The Dauphiné was, for us, a bit like the Dauphiné is for the riders, a kind of 75% effort. And then it's 100% when we get to Lille in a couple of weeks.
Well, at least you won't have to present it as whatever the new name is that I can't remember off the top of my head.
Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, I think. Yeah. It trips off the tongue, doesn't it? I think that's what it's called.
I knew you would make it sound good. Yeah.
So you're just about to, as we're speaking, but it'll be out by the time this goes out. Got a new book coming out called the Accidental Tour-ist, emphasised for the dash that's in there, hyphen, final brackets, Dispatches from the Road by Ned Boulting, which obviously talking about the Tour de France, because it's Ned Boulting, isn't it? Talk to us. Obviously, we don't want to give too much away about your book because we want people to go and buy it, but just a little bit of a rundown if they can't guess what that might be.
Well, I
about.
hope this one is quite obvious. I think my last book took a little bit of explaining. This one is this one is a bit of a simpler offering, and a book that I guess had been waiting in the wings for a long time. I was very conscious when I wrote 1923, which I think I spoke to you guys about when it came out. I was very conscious with that book, as I might have mentioned when we spoke, that it was the first book I had written that had literally zero jokes in it. It had no jokes. There wasn't a single joke. There wasn't even an attempt at a joke or even a sentence that might have elicited a whimsical smile in 1923. It just wasn't a funny book, which is not really what I do by and large. I think I consider my job to be to entertain to some extent, and across all the platforms I operate on. So I kind of knew that after 1923 I needed to return to home base a little bit, not the DIY, not the shop, no, which I haven't visited in years. Is it still existent? I don't know.
So.
Not the shop, but touch base with where I kind of started off in writing. And I started off in writing on the advice of the late, great Richard Moore, who, after a few years of working together with him, I think in around about 2009, Richard said, I think your story is very interesting because you came at the sport from the outside. Would you consider writing a book about your journey of falling in love with sport? And I had no idea whether or not I could write a book. And that's how the genesis of How I Won the Yellow Jumper kind of came about, which took the publishing industry by complete surprise and me by even greater surprise, because it touched a nerve with people at precisely the points where I think a large section of the population of this country the UK was getting to know cycling. So How I Won the Yellow Jumper was a bizarre success in publishing terms. And then I realised a couple of years ago that 15 years had passed almost. Well, when I started writing the book, 13 years had passed. And I've done a lot in 13 years. You know, my life has changed. Cycling has changed. My job within cycling has completely changed. And so I needed to sort of update the story, really, and broaden it out. So The Accidental Tour-ist is not just about the Tour de France, although it has the Tour at the centre of its kind of life, but it does spread its wings much further, just as I have. And, you know, I go to Kuala Lumpur and China and God knows, you know, all over Europe. And so it's a much broader story. And then I was in the middle of writing it finishing off writing it when the news broke that, you know, that was it for television and ITV and the Tour de France. So I messaged my publishers and said, I think we need to put the word final in brackets and add that to the title, because it does have a sense of, if How I Won the Yellow Jumper was opening a book, it does have a little bit of a sense of closing a book as well.
And what would you say for you has been the biggest change in the past 15 years since this one book to now, if you had to pin down one thing?
In the peloton? Well, I think probably the biggest change is women's racing. I think that's probably the single biggest change, because I don't, shamefully, I think I mentioned this in the book, I had to look back at How I Won the Yellow Jumper as a kind of slightly embarrassing reference point at times and go, oh God, what did I write about that? And how's that going to stand up, you know, a decade and a half later? And one of the most shameful aspects of How I Won the Yellow Jumper is the lack of female characters. There are two, right? One is my partner, Kath, who is at the beginning and the end of the book, is at my bedside in hospital after I've just had a bike accident. So she's in a kind of caring role. She is actually a nurse anyway, so that kind of makes sense. So she's the one female character. And the other female character is Odette, who used to do our catering at the Tour de France. And so she's a cook. So that's not great, is it? So that's where the kind of female contribution or landscape of How I Won the Yellow Jumper began and ended, which is nothing short of disgraceful. But it was very easy with the Accidental Tour-ist to expand on that as on the rise of women's racing and my friendship with both Marianne Vos and Lizzie Deignan, who in their different ways I think were the two drivers of all of this change over the last 15 years. And I think so. If you're asking me for the single biggest thing, Robyn, it's that, isn't it? From a position of it's not even on the radar really to it's pretty close to garnering on occasion as much attention as the men's race is a paradigm shift that I don't think any of us could have predicted.
And it's great that we get twice as much racing. I mean, if you told people yourself like 15 years ago, you'd be like, well, you get all this great racing, except now you do it twice.
Yeah, on the same day.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's been some really smart thinking around women's racing. I think you got to credit, I think it's Flanders Classics in particular, the race organisers, with coming up with that quite inspirational idea of running the women's races after the men's races on the same day, which seemed at first glance counterintuitive, but actually is inspired, you know, because it draws on the inheritance of the men's race and kind of like keeps that audience big. Along the same lines as I remember when I was working quite closely with the Paralympic movement, one of my first questions to them was, why do you put the Paralympic Games after the Olympic Games? Surely they would have more attention if they were before the Olympic Games. And they made the very clear and correct point that, no, we're not a warm-up show. We're not a warm-up show. This isn't. So I think that's there's been some really inspired thinking around women's racing, and you know, that I think probably only halfway there, if that. But it feels like it's arrived.
How bored are you at this point in the day of talking about the ITV show ending?
I'm going to be doing a lot more of it. I think. I think that day where in November when it was, I was actually doing my one-man sort of tour. I remember exactly where I was. I was in Bristol. I'd done the show at the Redgrave Theatre in Bristol the night before, and I was just having a cup of coffee in Clifton when I got a text message from Orla, just saying that, who's a friend of mine, just saying that she was really sorry the way that it had worked out and all that sort of thing. And I didn't know what she was talking about because ITV hadn't told me. I had no idea, but TNT had unilaterally just announced it on their social media that they had now had the exclusive rights, and by default, ITV didn't have anything. So that's how I found out that I'd lost my job, which kind of mortified Orla. But and from that moment on, my phone. So here's this thing: my phone didn't stop ringing for the rest of the day. And that really surprised me. But I got rung up by, you know, half a dozen broadsheet journalists who, and pretty much every newspaper, let alone, you know, outside of the cycling press, ran a story about it online or in print, which I thought was kind of like, that's quite big. That's resonated in an unexpected way. And then a couple of months later, the damn thing was debated in Parliament. And Gary Imlach and I were actually mentioned in Hansard. Which, like, again, was, well, I mean, what a waste of parliamentary time that is when the world is sort of going up in flames. But that was surprising. And now that we're getting closer to the start of the Tour de France, I can feel my phone buzzing again. So it's a story that hasn't really gone away, and it'll make quite a lot of noise again this summer for obvious reasons. And I think even next summer, there'll, you know, in 2026, there'll be another little kind of flutter of like, oh, you know. So I'm quite touched by how much I am asked to talk about it, because I kind of knew in principle that people valued the choice and valued the show, but I didn't know in practice until this happened. So it's a funny way to find out.
Which is quite frustrating, because you think if they'd have shown that support all the way through, then maybe ITV would have picked up the right.
It's funny, isn't it? I remember there was about 10 years ago, the BBC were trying to cut costs, weren't they? And they threatened to shut down Six Music. And everybody said, you can't shut down Six Music. It's a national institution. You know, it offers a unique service and all that sort of thing. And then the BBC sort of politely pointed out that 2.5 people listened to it. You know, like, you may think it's part of your life. You may declaim that it's a national treasure, but you've got to back that up and actually listen to it. And the problem is for ITV is that, yes, you know, sometimes in any given day, watching the highlights and the live show, 1 million people would watch the Tour de France, which completely eclipses subscription services by a huge ratio. But that's not enough anymore, because the price of, you know, re-signing those rights over the lifetime of me working there has gone up exponentially and way, way faster than the audience has built. So eventually it just reached that tipping point, and from a commercial point of view, it just wasn't valid anymore. And, ITV can't afford year on year to put a product on the air that loses them money. It's counting, it's maths.
I guess it makes it even more difficult that the TNT price hike / bringing Eurosport onto TNT came afterwards. So now, I'm assuming this year's ITV coverage is probably going to be by far the best figures that you've ever had.
Listen, let's hope so. So there's quite, I would like to think this is a rallying cry for just send us off with make a big, because you never know, it may come back. And if another broadcaster were perhaps to show an interest down the line, they would look at how it performed last time out for ITV. So if
get the band back together.
Christ, what age would we be then? So yeah, you never know. But let's send that message far and wide, because, and I think, I don't know, because they don't release their figures, but I think, there are obviously quite a large number of people who were Eurosport subscribers who haven't felt able, for very understandable reasons, to quadruple their monthly outgoings or whatever it is. Frankly, even I hesitated. Of course I do. Of course I subscribe to TNT. I have to. It's a professional obligation, and it's a tax-free business expense on my part. But even I hesitated. Thought, God, actually, blimey. And if I'm hesitating, what does that say about kind of the price point and the position? I don't know.
And then, what does your cycling commentary involvement look like post Tour de France? I know that's not the only commentary you do. You do some, I think it's the international feed. Yeah. I think you did the Giro, which I may have stumbled across, but that below board. I'm assuming you'll be carry on doing that. So if people were somehow accessing the world feed, they'd still be hearing your voice.
I have a strong relationship with RCS, so most of their big races I go out to Italy, and I love that. It's very, very different work. Completely different. You're talking to a very different audience, and I don't work with David Millar, so I haven't got that comfort blanket of David, who I work with. I feel very relaxed working with, so I'm constantly working with different co-commentators. It's extremely hard work, but I think it's quite interesting what you hinted there, Will, because I think one of the unintended consequences of what's happened to free-to-air Tour de France and the price hike is that people are being, let's say, resourceful with their consumption of cycling broadcasting, and they're finding ways of accessing stuff that perhaps they shouldn't. So I did have a sense broadcasting the Giro this year that I was talking to a few more people who may not have been in New Zealand, if you take my point. So normally I get the sense I'm just talking to 3 drunk students in New Zealand who've come back from a party in the middle of the night and have just stumbled across it on the free. But there were a few more people listening this year. So that's interesting, isn't it? I think there's a lot more of that going to happen.
Yeah, if you look at our Facebook comments, so we do guides on like which channels people can find the coverage on. And I think ever since the start of the year, that article normally just does well on search engines, but not necessarily on social media. But this year, you know exactly where everyone's watching it, and they will tell you about it. And it's probably not on TNT. But anyway, to get onto this year's tour, just come off the Dauphiné, Pogačar has won. It kind of looked like maybe he wasn't going to, and then he did. What are your takeaways? Do you think it's just going to be the same at the tour, or do you think maybe Vingegaard's holding something back?
I don't think he was holding anything back. I really don't. I just think he's miles off Pogačar. Miles off him. Having said that, he's also, Jonas Vingegaard, in a class of his own ahead of the opposition behind. So he's just locked into this very distant and remote second place. That's where he belongs right now, I think. But of course, that's not going to stop us convincing ourselves over the coming weeks and then getting to Lille that there is this hidden narrative that I'm sure we'll go into on air, because none of us know what's going to happen. Not even Pogačar or Vingegaard know what's going to happen. That Pogačar can't hold this form for 3 weeks and that Vingegaard will build his form over 3 weeks. Whether that happens or not, absolutely nobody knows. But it was curious, the Dauphiné, wasn't it? Because you had this time trial on stage 4 where I remember bumping into Gary Imlach in the corridors in Ealing Studios, where we broadcast from immediately after the time trial had finished. I'd stopped commentating. I was actually just running to the toilet, and he was coming out of his little scripting room. Yeah, well, no, he hadn't. It wasn't. We weren't just literally swapping places but and we both said, "Oh, now this is beautifully set up, isn't it?" Because all the big three were in like the reverse order of expectations. So you thought this is going to be so close now; they're all going to finish on the same time after stage 8, and of course, it didn't happen. And I think the most cogent explanation of why Pogačar underperformed so markedly, I mean, he did lose a lot of time in a short distance in the individual time trial, was that they were trying something, UAE, in terms of his position and his approach and maybe his setup for time trialing specifically, that hampered him. He didn't look comfortable. And in the interview at the end of stage 8, when Seb Piquet, I think in the international feed, said in his usual Seb Piquet way, kind of said, what now? Where will you go now for your relaxation, your preparation? Yeah, he did his usual kind of like casually taking a cigarette out of his mouth, kind of a question, and kind of like, where do we go? And his long rambling question was basically could have been summed up with, what are you going to do next? And Tadej Pogačar said, well, like, not much, because I'm quite good. Like, I'm sort of where I need to be. But the one thing of interest that he did say was, maybe we'll work on time trialing. And that was quite pointed. And he also there was this little moment that somebody in our production team picked up on after the time trial when he was warming down. And I think Eurosport had a camera that was just like filming him warming down, a live camera, until the point where he stopped warming down. He got off the rollers and he walked over to Matteo Jorgensen's bike and stared at it and kind of because he knew the camera was on him, and kind of lifted it up and went, like that. And I think he was messaging his team, actually. I think that was all like, that's how you set a bike up, you numpties. That's why I've lost 40 seconds, you know.
You could see his bike was actually noticeably wobbling during that time trial as well.
So I think that's the explanation. So he's flying, isn't he? I mean, it's like, but we just don't know. We don't know. We should know by now, but collectively we just have this ridiculous amnesia with Pogačar that we forget that he's able to reach this peak condition and stay there, and he just breaks all the rules of kind of like, well. And maybe his entire approach is revolutionary and everyone else should learn from it. You know, like the whole accepted wisdom of, if you're going to win the Tour de France, you don't race Paris-Roubaix and Flanders and Liège and win it. Maybe you do. Because maybe practice, like measuring yourself as a GC racer against the violence of Mathieu van der Poel and trying to respond to his accelerations is precisely what you need in order to come to the Tour de France and destroy your nearest opponent. So it's interesting. He is in so many ways rewriting the norms, and he continues to do it, and he continues to ask questions of the rest of us. But I mean, we're not going to mess around with anybody's understanding of the sport. He goes to Lille, the clearest favourite since for me since the Chris Froome years. I think, and I say that with some regret. I'd love to see a close contest, and maybe we will. Maybe we will. But
yeah, I might get that discussion underway. Are we then too quick to forget that Vingegaard did win 2 tours in a row against Pogačar, and then last year he looked pretty good at times, and he seemed, and maybe he was absolutely fine, but obviously he had his big crash in Basque Country and seemingly maybe wasn't at his top shape. Maybe he's just come down to the Dauphiné from altitude, a little bit undercooked, and get better into the race, and we'll see fully in shape Vingegaard beating.
Well, you've just scripted the opening chats for day one of the, that is precisely the kind of that's precisely the straw clutching that we're all going to be doing, but none of us know the answer to that. But where I completely agree with you, Will, is it is very easy to forget, and it's a drum that I have over the last few years been banging consistently about Vingegaard. Up until this point, when they have both got to the Tour de France fresh and without one way or another being hampered by injury, he has been a better Tour de France racer than Tadej Pogačar. You know, in his first two victories, he wasn't dropped by Pogačar once. On the high, it took Pogačar years before he'd actually dropped him and distanced him on a summit finish. So there is a strong body of evidence that suggests just that Vingegaard is a better Tour de France racer. It's just that's like saying, when like, I don't know, Bournemouth play. No, I don't know enough about football to extend this metaphor. But when they talk about, like, I just don't know. But when they talk about, the historical head-to-heads between football clubs, it's of no relevance, is it? Like, it's actually about who's in what kind of form with what kind of players right now, and that is that's what all we've got to judge on. And Vingegaard looks like he's way off Pogačar, and Vingegaard was not, unless it was the bluff of the ages, he was not holding anything back at the Dauphiné. In fact, I think he realised quite early on the Ben O'Connor effect. When Pogačar goes, you don't try and go with him. And it was a very cursory on both those occasions with Vingegaard. He did like 20 pedal strokes, lasted 8 seconds, looked round, sat up. And from that moment on, it became a training camp for Jonas Vingegaard. As he realised the distance and the gulf between the two, he's just got to try and close it now as much as he can. And for that reason, he went very deep on those climbs, Jonas Vingegaard, whereas Tadej Pogačar self-evidently didn't. He really didn't.
And one of the other sort of juicy potentials that I wanted to talk about with you was Primož Roglič, and the sense that he's never sort of got that extra level to win the Tour de France. And with that in mind, and given the likes of Lipowitz's performance at the Dauphiné, he was incredibly strong. Pellizzari finishing, I think it was 6th at the Giro. Do you see this as a sort of moment for Red Bull to kind of focus on the future, or do you keep persisting with Roglič if you were in charge of Red Bull?
I think it's the latter. Sadly, I was at the Giro, watched every pedal stroke of the Giro. He was a long way off from very early on. It didn't take long before, and also like he does crash too often. I mean, it's like it's not. There's enough evidence there to suggest that is a real problem for Roglič and has been throughout his career. That aside, I mean, you never know whether you're going to crash or not. It's just that his strike rate is quite high, isn't it? But he did look a long way off. He looked old, actually. He looked like he couldn't respond. He couldn't go through the gears. He looked like he was sort of done physically. And you have to always bear in mind the relative strength of the pelotons of the Tour and the Giro. The Giro is such an exciting race, such a beautiful race, a brilliant race, but it is the Giro peloton. And of the 3 pelotons of the 3 Grand Tours, it is notably and year on year more exaggeratedly the weakest of the 3. It was a thrilling race, but it was a thrilling race between Richard Carapaz and Isaac Del Toro that Simon Yates somehow managed to manipulate to win. And none of those 3, with respect to them, are going to win the Tour de France or even come close to winning the Tour de France in this generation. And Roglič wasn't even close to them. So he can't win the Tour de France from there, can he? So I think there is a passing of the baton now. I was very impressed with Lipovic at the Dauphiné. Thought he was, I think he's the real deal, isn't he? Yeah.
Now, I don't think there's a cyclist in the world who hasn't crashed or had a bike nicked, which is where Laka bike insurance comes in. Now, I'm usually really skeptical about insurance companies. When you need them, it somehow feels like they'll do anything to avoid paying out your claim. And then your premium goes up and you still have to pay the excess. But Laka is genuinely different. There's no excess on approved claims and there's 0 depreciation. Laka covers everything from a cracked wheel to emergency travel cash if you're stranded mid-ride. And if you say you've got a bent mech hanger, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. These guys, they're cyclists as well. There are no fixed contracts. You can pause, upgrade, or cancel your cover at any time. And what's more, each month, Laka adds up the total cost of the claims and divides it amongst the collective up to a capped amount, so you only pay your fair share. With their collective insurance model, Laka only makes money when they settle claims, so they're on your side to get you back on your bike. I've heard loads of great stories about Laka being genuinely decent, so it's no surprise they've been voted best cycle insurance provider 7 years in a row. So find out for yourself by heading over to laka.co/cyclist, that's laka.co/cyclist, and use the code CyclistMag at the checkout to get your first 30 days free. T's and C's apply. Laka, collective cover that goes further than you think.
When you're preparing for your commentary, or even just in general life, I know you speak a few different languages. How much do you keep up with the European press? Because you're fluent in German, I think, right? Are you seeing much in the German press about Lipovitz taking that step up? And then are you also seeing stuff about young Paul Sexas?
Yeah, he's an amazing talent. David Millar's very excited about him, and that says something because David Millar had never heard of him going into the Dauphiné. David always arrives into like a summer of commentary going, "Who? Never heard of him? Lipovitz? Not heard of him." But his ability to learn is very fast. But he's a good judge, David, and he thinks he's seen stuff in Paul Sexas that he hasn't seen in a French rider really ever. Kind of like of his. Not even in Pinot. He's 18, the kid. So he's a phenomenal prospect. Mm-hmm. I don't know too much about Paul Sexas. However, I do sort of like go grazing around the German press, and they're very excited about Lipovitz, and for them to have a sort of genuine GC racer to celebrate is kind of hasn't happened since the doping generation. So it could be really significant. Lipovitz competing for a podium at the Tour de France specifically, it could potentially be a game changer, and just the game changer that ASO need, because ASO own the Deutschland Tour, and they and it's still a 4-day race. I think. I don't think it's expanded beyond that. Maybe 5 days, but it's still not even a week-long race, which is crazy when you think about it. Germany has the economy, it has the topography and the size of population to support a much bigger race than just a 4-day race. I mean, even the Tour of Britain's longer than that. But I do remember. I remember years and years and years ago when he was still racing, and absolutely at the height of his success. I spent a day in Erfurt in East Germany, having lunch and cruising around town with Marcel Kittel. When he was the yellow jersey, that he'd been the yellow jersey for the first time in his career that year. And we were just wondering, and now Marcel is quite recognisable. I think we can all agree, like 6'3", blonde, beautiful, and like a bit of a god. And no one recognised him. We were walking around Erfurt, which was his hometown at the time. He lived there, and no one recognised him. He wasn't stopped once for an autograph. And I went, Marcel, this is blowing my mind. Like, if you walked around London, you'd be stopped more often than that. Let alone Milan or Paris or Belgium. And he went, no, this is he said, unless you're, for the German sporting public, unless you're winning the Tour de France outright, no one's that interested. So what they need to kickstart that is a genuine GC contender. And then I think it's really good for cycling if the German market bursts back into life.
Yeah, definitely. Because you had the likes of, obviously, Marcel Kittel, you had John Degenkolb, you had Tony Martin. And I remember, this is probably going on maybe 8 years ago now. I remember reading their interviews and how they didn't have, say, free-to-air Tour de France's to watch because it hadn't been available in Germany from the doping years. And it seems like they were trying to get that public perception shifted, but they could never sort of break that barrier down. And now that there's been enough time and you have some exciting hopes coming through, maybe it's sort of perhaps rejuvenation. But it's something that I'd like to see, definitely.
Yeah, it's such I don't know if you've travelled much in Germany, but it's such a curious market because the cycling scene, because if you go to a newsagent at a big railway station and you kind of browse, it's always quite interesting, isn't it, to look at the sports magazines and go, well, what do they care about in this country? And there are endless cycling magazines. But with respect to this publication, because I used to write for them for a decade, they all look a little bit like Cycling Plus, right? They are designed primarily for the sportive rider, and the hobby cyclist, so they're about kit and they're about where to ride your bike and all that sort of thing. And they don't reference the elite sport at all. And that's borne out by my experience of going years ago to the Hamburg, whatever it's called, Cycle Classics, that one-day race. And I went there to the start line, and it was a World Tour race. So everyone was there from Marcel Kittel downwards at the team buses waiting to start their race. And 100 metres away, the sportive that had been run in the morning was finishing. So everyone was gathered there and cheering their husbands and their wives, or whatever, across the finish line. And at the team bus compound, which was completely open to the public, there wasn't a single person waiting for selfies or autograph hunting or anything. There was just me, and I was just there to doorstep Marcel and get pest to him. And there's a real disconnect between the two different expressions of cycling, something you sometimes see in this country. I'm occasionally, when I'm asked to do a corporate ride or something, and I'll go along and I'll be riding with people who are lawyers or something in the city of London, and they're going for an away day and riding around Berkshire or something, and I'll be talking to them, and they'll have all the gear and clearly cycle quite a lot and have no interest whatsoever in professional road racing, which I find absolutely mind-blowing. They've taken the worst of cycling and they're celebrating that to the exclusion of the best of cycling. What are they thinking? Total idiots. So it'd be really nice if the two sides of that coin were joined a bit in Germany, and I think it's an exciting prospect.
And then going a bit closer to home, I mean, this question's probably changed over the last couple of months, actually, but with ITV coming to an end, Ineos very much changing, we've Geraint Thomas retiring, we're coming to the end of what some would probably call as the golden age of British road cycling. However, you also see more British male riders than ever, and women too, in the World Tour, but not necessarily being a GC rider. Obviously, we can talk about Simon Yates as a different beast. Do you think it is an end of the golden age, or are we just so embedded now in the culture that we're just there? We're just the France who are not going to win the Tour, but we've got loads of riders there.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know how it's going to play out because it's very contradictory at the moment, isn't it? We've got this enduring shrinking. It's not a recent phenomenon. It's been going on for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and COVID obviously accelerated it in some ways. Shrinking of cycling in this country in all its different expressions. We've got the complete absence of continental teams we've got races that are struggling to exist, races that have just stopped existing. We've got contraction of the cycling, shops and the cycling industry is struggling. And yet, last year at the Tour de France, there are more British riders on the start list than there'd ever been in the history of the race. And I suspect we'll have something similar this year. And across the World Tour peloton, we've got the absolute proliferation in almost every single team, without exception, of really talented riders, some of whom I think could become major GC contenders in the years to come. So I don't, I wouldn't rule out us producing another GC contender. I think it's perfectly possible, actually. But I don't know how long this can last. That's my point. Because I genuinely think, and it's hard to be scientific about this, but anecdotally, and in my own experience, having met some of these young men and women, I hear so many times, sorry to return to the original subject of this podcast, but I hear from these riders, their pathway of getting into this sport and getting interested in the first place was because their parents sat them down to watch the 7 o'clock highlights of the Tour de France. And that's how they got bitten by it. And so and genuinely, it's almost universal in their life stories to hear this kind of being told. But without that kind of absolutely mainstream introduction to specifically the Tour de France, the biggest shop window of the sport, I don't know if that's sustainable to produce this number of riders who are as resourceful and committed and motivated and talented as they are to go overseas to find, their career path, because it doesn't exist here, is really extraordinary, and it flies in the face of the facts. But I fear it might be unsustainable.
Germany?
And sorry, just to pick up on your, I should mention that I think Kat Ferguson is possibly one of the most significant riders in the peloton at the moment, both men and women, because I think she is so talented across so many disciplines and could end up being such a major rider. And I think the way she bears herself, the way her maturity on and off the bike is quite staggering. And I think if she can fulfill her promise, I think she'll be not only of immense significance for maintaining the profile of cycling in Britain, but I think actually she's going to be the next rider who's going to drive the next wave of success for, and global appeal for women's racing in the years to come. So I think she's her presence eclipses any of the young male riders, actually, as talented as they are. I think Cat Ferguson, they can build an industry around her. She is absolutely the real deal.
Do you think that's where maybe the coverage might bounce back, and that obviously probably the women's and men's deals separate, or more races keep coming in? Because obviously there's still some historic men's races that aren't women's races, and obviously there's an argument to say, women can have their races that aren't men's races, but you see from stuff like the Tour de France and Paris-Roubaix that if you do replicate that, it most likely will lead to pretty immediate success. Should you think with someone like Cat Ferguson, other riders like Pfeiffer Georgie, Anna Henderson, maybe it's actually women's cycling in the UK that will carry the torch for a good while?
Yeah, quite possibly. I think that's very possibly the case, because Cat, who I've been lucky enough over the last few months to meet for the first time, actually, and our paths kept crossing. I went up to the women's tour. I went to Paris-Roubaix, and that was the first time I met her. Cat is. Here's a prediction for you. Cat, within an Olympic cycle, will have an Olympic gold medal around her neck, and she'll probably have an elite rainbow jersey within years. And at that point, she will be the next cyclist after Chris Hoy, Bradley Wiggins, and Mark Cavendish to become Sports Personality of the Year. All she needs is Olympic success, I think, because we're just weird about the Olympics in this country, and we kind of think that nothing else matters. Absolute nonsense, obviously, but that's how it plays in this country. If you want Claire Balding to interview you, it doesn't matter what you do at the Paris-Roubaix. You've got to win an Olympic gold medal. But I think Cat Stevens. I met Cat Stevens the other day. That's why I'm thinking about Cat Stevens. Cat Ferguson. That's a funny story. Actually, I was recording the audiobook of the Accidental Tour-ist in a sound booth next to Cat Stevens, where he was recording the audiobook of his memoir. So we met when we had a break.
No, he's not Cat Stevens anymore, is he?
Well, I think he might have changed his name back from Yusuf Islam to Cat Stevens. I think. Really? I'm not sure. Anyway, I wasn't sure, so I didn't actually call him by his name. But I knew he was. Anyway, Cat Ferguson will be Sports Personality of the Year. And I don't think Matt Brennan will anytime soon. But I think he'll be British national champion in a couple of weeks. That's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah. That is an interesting one, though. Brennan being the next guy through at Visma, so young, that could really be something. The different kind of British rider, sprinting's very different to what it was when Mark Cavendish was at his peak. And I guess we'll probably see again this year that it's not as straightforward as the 9-man HCC, whatever they were, train. Who's going to be the best sprinter at the Tour? I think at the beginning of the year, we probably all thought it was going to be Jonathan Milan. But after the Dauphiné, I'm not sure.
His Dauphiné was... what surprised me at the Dauphiné, I think you're right about Milan. I think when he's... when everything aligns, when the stars align for Jonathan Milan, it's pretty hard to beat him, isn't it? He's the closest thing to Marcel Kittel that we've had since Marcel Kittel. He's violent with that bicycle. It's kind of like awe-inspiring, isn't it, to watch? But he does need everything to be there for him. And on that one Dauphiné stage, when he had Consonni, Stuyven, and whoever the hell else was in his train, I can't remember off the top of my head, and that Lidl Trek train just worked perfectly. He was absolutely unbeatable. But but for the rest of the race, he was a little bit fragile. So I was surprised at how poorly he was climbing, because normally it's a bit of like a football cliche. He's got a nice touch for a big man, but for a big man, he climbs well. He does climb well, but he wasn't going so well at the Dauphiné, which is often a sign of condition. His condition isn't quite there for Grand Tours. So he looked vulnerable to this. Don't forget, he's never raced the Tour de France, and it's not the Giro. It's not the Giro. It's, you know, even making it to the end in the time cut in the Gruppetto, it's not the Giro Gruppetto. It's really hard. So there's a few question marks about Milan, and the other two fastest men in the world are Philipsen and Millar. And of those three, I'd back at this point Millar probably to end up in Paris with the biggest number of wins, but none of them. But then again, I was looking at this first week of racing at the Tour, and they're really quite complicated. You know, there's very few of the sprints are straightforward until we get to those two stages that shoot south after the Mur de Bretagne. Then you go to Châteauroux, where Mark Cavendish will obviously come out of retirement, pin a number on and win again. But those are straightforward stages. But up until that point, nothing's straightforward really. So, so maybe that's nonsense about Millar, who's also, let's not forget, he's in a GC team, so he's not going to have much of a lead-out train. So...
Well, speaking of that first week, actually, I think maybe I'm right in saying that breakaways feel like they're becoming less successful at the Tour de France, probably because of the strength of Visma bike and UAE. But would you say that first week there's a real opportunity for those surprise wins to happen, or is it more likely to be a Van der Poel, Van Aert battle for the punchers?
I think that's a very good question that's quite hard to answer, but I do fear for, you know, that dynamic that set in at the Tour a little bit last year where no one wanted to go in the break on the sprinter stages. It was like, that's a problem for cycling. That's like, and it's a function, I think, of the seriousness with which the second and third tier teams kind of approach their craft now. You know, they're no longer prepared just to be there to make up the numbers and, you know, be the fools who attack. So let's pray. I think the thing that we need, like, if climate change is going to be our friend rather than our enemy at all, then the thing that we need is wind. We haven't really had much. There was very little wind at the Giro. Well, wasn't much wind at the Tour de France last year. I think they've designed the opening week of this race with wind in mind, and they just need to get a bit lucky with that because, you know, I go back to that. My absolute benchmark for breakaway success. Of course, we saw some wonderful breakaways make it to the line last year, and in a way, the question we're asking is a bit pointless because they mean so much because they are so rare. You know, so there's that. But you know, in recent history, the greatest breakaway success was that stage at the Giro 3 years ago. I think it was when in Treviso, where Dries de Bont won the stage, and he masterminded that quartet of riders with Magnus Cort, Davide Gaboro, and Edoardo Affini. Those four riders just played the game perfectly and exploited a howling tailwind to their advantage in the last 80 kilometers. But you need the stars to align for that to happen. So I think let's just pray for wind. And then the course is set up for it. And I think it could be really interesting, but they need a little bit of assistance. Let's hope that happens. If it's just still and hot, we're going to see a lot of days where people will hesitate to go in a break at all. And then eventually one rider from Intermarché or Arkea will reluctantly go up the road, and that'll be it.
So the problem that, from the way I see it, is that with the promotion and relegation meaning so much to the teams that are at risk or maybe on the cusp of going into the World Tour, 10th place in the sprint is worth more than a day in the breakaway. So they've all seemed to have a sprinter that will go for a top 10, or in Astana's case, they'll get about 5 riders in the top 10, even though they know they're not going to win. So is that affecting how many riders go in the breakaway? Like at the Giro, you see, you know, great, it's Davide Baies on his own all day. You know, they're not expecting to get promoted. They're really doing it for the breakaway, but there aren't enough of those teams doing it anymore. Like Uno X still very rarely will be that team, apart from last year when Abrahamson was going for on that nice little polka dot run. Is the promotion relegation cycle ruining it all?
Yeah, 100% it is. I mean, I'm not totally averse to the promotional relegation thing. I think it's got some strengths to it, but that isn't a strength. That is a problem, and in particular at Grand Tours, where you get this kind of like big attention on cycling, and you get a lot of points. I think that is a dynamic that has set in that is not productive, really. So I think that does need to be looked at, and maybe the points weighted differently somehow, or maybe points given for other aspects of racing. Why is it all about your finishing? Why is it all about what you do at the finish line? You know, I think that it's quite easy to mock the Giro, which I am very happy to do because I have an affectionate relationship with it. But because there is something quite funny about, on the final stage in Rome, about the number of different podium ceremonies there are for all the different classifications and all the different competitions. But because it's quite funny, isn't it, ultimately? In fact, there was one, I was watching, the very last podium ceremony in Rome was for such an irrelevant category that it went to Mads Pedersen, but by the time it came around, Mads Pedersen had just pissed off. He'd gone. He left. He couldn't be bothered with it. And so I could see what was going on behind the scenes. In their absolute desperation, they put Lorenzo Fortunato on the podium, and he won it instead because he was the only rider still hanging around. And the only reason he was still hanging around is because he's going out with one of the women who work for RCS. So he was just waiting to go out for a party. So they went, "Oh, you'll do. Anyway, and I can't even remember what the category was. But, sorry, there's a point here somewhere. Yes, so every day when I was commentating, and believe me, I needed narratives to kind of like get my teeth into, there was genuine intrigue in what Dries de Bont was up to chasing the Intergiro. There was the new Red Bull kilometre that not only had a big cash prize every day, that was a real incentive for some of the Bardiani riders and all that sort of thing, but it also had an overall classification. Like the Red Bull kilometre had an overall classification, and riders were literally riding for it, and actually incentivized the breakaway. It made the whole thing. It just gave it a level of depth. And the Tour sort of like, because the Tour's a bit grander than that, it shies away from offering these slightly meagre classifications, and I don't see why it should. You know, I think maybe just handing out some UCI points. Why not? What's 10th place worth in terms of UCI points? I don't know. 50? I don't know what it is. So, but why not just put a UCI points sprint? Why not? And that would animate things, wouldn't it? But I mean, you know, honestly, I'm banging my head against a brick wall. I've had all these brilliant ideas about how to make stage racing more interesting, and everyone just laughs at me, and no one ever listens. I still want the turbo. I told you about the turbo rider. I still want the turbo rider to be deployed. It's the best idea in cycling.
Well, as a commentator, you know, that's part of the role is filling those dry.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
No breakaway, 150 kilometers. As you opened, I think you opened your most recent live show with that
that phenomenon.
That phenomenon. Yeah. We'll skip to the end of the Tour. Paris is back after its year off, but it's not the same. We've got a little loop going up the hill to Montmartre like we saw in the Olympics. Not quite the same as the Olympics. Do you think they're trying a bit too hard? Do you think they should just keep it as it was before? Do you think it's not quite Olympic-y enough?
It's probably worth a try, isn't it? I'm a bit sceptical as to whether or not it'll produce the desired outcome. I mean, it's a gamble, but you might see, who are you going to see? Tobias Johannesson. Uno X are going to be all over the front because Johannesson will be chasing 6th place. It might be a bit like that, and then because Uno X have been riding so hard, Pogačar will attack and take another minute, and maybe that's what they clearly want, and I sort of understand why. So I'm being a bit of a Luddite and a reactionary about this, but they clearly want Tadej Pogačar to finish on his own in the yellow jersey in Paris on the Champs-Élysées and put his arms in the air, because that would be quite a shot, wouldn't it? That would be like, oh, we've never seen that before. But on the other hand, I do think it's like thin gruel for the sprinters. That's the second year in a row. And their race, just because the cameras don't capture it, their race, you talk to any sprinter and the riders who work with that side of the team, their race is every bit as important, I think. And their reward has always traditionally been Paris and the Champs-Élysées sprints. And for them to just have that ripped away from them, because no way is it going to be a sprint. No way is it going to be a sprint. It's going to be in bits and pieces. And riders are going to be finishing the Tour de France in the gruppetto. Which one of the nice things about the Champs-Élysées is that however many riders complete the race, 150 riders come over the line pretty much together. They complete it as a race. It's no one's dropped. We're all in, and that's got a sort of like, for me, a symbolic value. And do you know what? I quite like here I'm talking myself into it, but I quite like the rhythm of the final stage. I know most people sitting at home they're not sitting in Paris at the finish line like I am, and they don't feel the weight of 3 weeks of traveling like I do. So it obviously means more to me. But I don't mind the fact that there are all the shenanigans, and then eventually you get onto the circuit and a race starts. It's just like a neutralised rollout with a very short criterium race. And I don't mind that. And the Champs-Élysées stage can be pretty interesting, actually, in terms of the bunch sprints. So they're throwing something away and they're replacing it with something that could be amazing, but probably won't be. However, like I say, it is worth a try, and they are being responsive to public opinion. I am very much out of line with public opinion on this, I suspect. Since every single year, the biggest single kind of comment we get about stage 21 is, why isn't it a real race? Or what happens if there's only 1 second in it, and all that sort of thing. And I get that. I get it's just weird to have a sporting event that reaches its climax with a total anticlimax.
There we go. Maybe they should just put a Red Bull kilometre at the top of the climb and just do it once. So there's a few seconds on the line. If there is 1 second in it, they can have a sprint and then we can peel off.
Yeah. Or just put an arch at the top of the climb that is the arch of the unknown prize. And then they find out at the end what it was.
Oh, and it could actually dock points.
Yeah, dock points. Yeah, or just it's 20 minutes. You've just won 20 minutes. Well done, you. Yeah, who knows?
Well, one thing that I did want to ask you, and it sort of comes from that tradition versus breaking away from tradition mindset, and probably because we're so close to the Tour de France finishing in a time trial, that this change might be a bit like, I guess maybe too soon. I know it is a special event, but I wasn't there to watch Vingegaard win his breakaway. And something that I've always wanted was to see a breakaway fight on the final day on the Champs-Élysées, because it's such a anomaly, I guess. Would you sort of, I mean, I know you do understand that kind of need for something different now and again, and that's not going to change unless, I guess, the courses change. But do you see another option in, say, the next 5 years, say that it continues to finish on the Champs-Élysées, that will ever change, that we might get a breakaway? Or do you only ever see it playing out as an expected sprint finish?
Yeah, I mean, it's no, that will never. I can't see that ever changing. Actually, I unless you had some really anomalous year. The only thing that would change that potentially is if all the sprinters, pretty much bar one, had abandoned the race, and so you had no one to control it, and you had like 10 teams willing, 12 teams willing to attack and make it, or you had terrible weather. You'd need something. You'd need like a lightning strike event, really, in multiple different ways to change the narrative. There's too much strength in that peloton, isn't there? For and there's if you think about the nature of the course, yes, it's cobbles, but also it's a 2.5 kilometre straight road, and then you turn around, so like you can see them. There's nowhere to hide. It's an incredibly wide road, so everything possible militates against a breakaway making it to the line. But so maybe it is, it's just, I don't know how you alter that unless you were to what you could do, I suppose, potentially is deviate the route a little bit. So you don't go back down the Champs-Élysées. You could go up it and then maybe at the Étoile, dive off to the left and kind of like flick-flack through the other little side roads. So there are corners and it's a bit more of a technical circuit, and then dive under the tunnel and do it all again. That would be interesting. I don't know what the practicalities of that would be like in terms of closing off even more of Paris. But that could be quite cool and worth considering. But no, on balance, I suppose I'm just being a bit of a stuck in the mud on it. I think I am looking forward to it. It is something different. I'm a little bit disappointed it's the last one we'll ever do, because I would have liked to have kind of like signed off where I began in some ways. And also, I'm going to, if Tadej Pogačar really is going to finish on his own in the yellow jersey, I got no idea what I'm going to say. I ran out of words about Tadej Pogačar a long time ago. So I've got 3 weeks to think, what on earth do I say at that moment? I might just say nothing and just drop the microphone. All you hear is a thud.
That would be quite some statement if you and David left the commentary booth 10 minutes before the end.
Yeah, just go and have a pint. Well, you know what's going to happen now. See ya.
I don't know how much you've studied the route so far, but we've got some pretty big hitters on the way this year. Obviously, everyone is going to watch every single stage on ITV4. However, if you had to recommend one stage for someone to make sure that they tune in for start to finish, which one would it be?
Okay, I'm going to be really obvious here, I think. I'm going to say stage... Well, is it an obvious thing to say? I don't know. But stage 1, how about that? Because for me, like, I was asked... I did an interview recently where people said, is it going to be emotional? When's it going to hit you? This is the last of 23 kind of participations as a journalist in the Tour. And the obvious thing to say, I suppose, would be at the end when the rider's on the podium and the sun is setting behind the Arc de Triomphe and all that kind of thing. And yes, that will hit home. But actually, for me, the most thrilling moment of any Tour de France is actually the moment that we first get live pictures from the start line of stage 1, before the neutralised rollout, when they're just rolling up to the starts and the key riders are lining up on the front. And it's normally a helicopter shot, and you can see all the colours of the peloton, and all of the riders are there. They're all there. None of them have crashed. None of them have got sick. None of them have lost any time in GC. None of them have won a stage. There are no King of the Mountains points. It's all that potential is there, locked up in that peloton, and the damn thing is about to start again. And, you might have a predictable outcome in mind, but you sure as hell don't know all the crazy stuff that will happen, because crazy stuff will happen. Absolutely no doubt about that. The joy of it is we have no idea what it's going to be. And I love that moment where the story, it's like picking up a book, isn't it? And then opening the page for the first time. It's just a really special moment, and it's really soon. And just talking about it makes me quite excited. So yeah, watch stage 1. Watch stage 1 of the Tour de France.
And don't turn it off.
And just don't turn it off. Just keep your telly on for a month. Yeah.
And then if there's a rider that's maybe not going to finish on the overall podium, or be one of the top 3 sprinters that you might say, well, for this guy, do you have someone like that?
Yeah, I do. And I would have said this had he not achieved what he just did on the Dauphiné. I think Jake Stewart is in the form of his life. I think he's a really dangerous rider. I think he's looking really good. I've noticed this the last couple of years. That boy has come on so much, and there's so much to what he does. And Pascal Ackermann crashed out of the Dauphiné. I'm not sure he's going to be ready in time for the Tour. So Jake has a real opportunity here to really make his mark. I think he could win a stage. And I think he could, and I think he could do more than that. I think he might be the kind of rider who could have a tilt at the green jersey and see how deep he goes in that as well.
On his funny bike.
On his extremely, obviously, very fast, funny bike. Yeah.
That obviously David Millar can't say anything about.
No, but I'm sure he'll find a way of saying a lot about it.
I thought that was absolutely bizarre. Not that David Millar is not saying anything about the bike, but Jake Stewart finished just behind that crazy GC Van der Poel group on that first stage.
Yes, he did.
He was very clearly faster than everyone else there. And then they made him work for Ackermann, and then I think it was the next sprint. Ackermann was absolutely nowhere. I think Jake Stewart could have probably beaten Milan if they just let him have that, because then the next time when he actually did go, because Ackermann crashed out, it wasn't close.
Yeah, but I mean, you can see the thinking. Ackermann, look at pop onto his Pro Cycling Stats page and look at how many races he's won compared to Jake. I get the seniority thing, and it's only sometimes with hindsight that you kind of understand these things and you go, well, that was a bit weird. But they have to kind of prove the concept, don't they? And it was a bit like that last year at the Tour when Intermarché started the race with Gerben Thijssen and Biniam Girmay, and actually everyone thought Thijssen's probably got the edge in a fast sprint on Girmay, and Girmay, let's be honest, he hasn't done much for a couple of years, and then they rode quite specifically for Thijssen in that first sprint, and Biniam had absolutely no support, and from that moment on it was kind of like, oh, that's kind of like what we should be doing now. And they flip tactics. And that can happen in a team. And I understand it because especially especially in sprinting, there's limited amounts of understanding about relative form and sharpness that you can glean from a training camp, right? I think with GC riders, that's much more apparent because it's a numbers thing ultimately, isn't it? And, you can measure that. But the sharpness of mind, motivation and nerve, as well as the kind of like top end power and recovery and top end power again, those things are much harder to calibrate in a sprint. So I think it often happens at races that you go in with one plan and another one emerges because it speaks for itself. So I'm really interested to see what Jake can do at this race.
And then one question that I had that this kind of relates to what we were saying before. Are you going to be like kids on the last day of school, or are you going to be strictly professional all the way through?
We had a little production meeting about this during the Dauphiné, because obviously it's exactly the same team who make the Dauphiné highlights too. And the question was asked, because we're on air for a lot of hours over a month, and the question was asked sort of what do we say, if anything, about the lights going out and free to air cycling effectively disappearing from British TV. And I think the consensus was pretty unanimous that what we're going to do is going to be very sober, and we're going to show and not tell. There will be, in other words, there's going to be, I think, a lot of nostalgia. I think that our producers are going back through the archives and digging out stuff that dates right back to the Channel 4 era, and so I think people will, I hope that when the race situation allows for us to dip away and kind of fumble around in the memory banks a bit, we'll do that, but with a soft touch. It's not going to be, look what we are missing. I think it's just I think it's what the viewers are going to want to see. Because the viewers have been part of our lives, and we understand as well that we have been part of the viewers' lives for a very long time. So not to do that would be quite weird. But I mean, that's where the point that we're making starts and finishes. It's just, this is what we've enjoyed together for a very long period of time.
And I guess when that curtain sadly closes, what is one thing that you would say throughout the years working at ITV that you hope viewers will take from this experience? Because it is such an experience. It's such a, you're almost invited into people's homes like every summer, and it's sort of intimate in a way, and you are part of one of the many voices of summer. What would you hope that people would take from all this?
I think that's a really good point. Very nicely expressed, Robyn, the idea of being invited into someone's home. That's precisely what I've always felt. And I think if I want to sum up the strength of the race and the offering and the place of importance that it's occupied in people's lives, in one sort of like thought, I think it's that, because I know this is applied to me, and so I think by implication it's kind of been transmitted across the piece. And I also something I've learned from my colleagues, from Gary and Matt and David in his own way, and Pete in his own mad bonkers way as well, is it is an event which, like it or not, broadens horizons. It literally broadens horizons, because every day that's what you're looking at. Endless horizons of a country you may know quite well, but you don't know every corner of it. And the Tour de France will teach you that. And the peloton itself, this organism made up of a million parts, is something that you will never understand fully. So all you can do is learn. When I first started, it was a francophone environment where very few people spoke English. That's changed. But still it has this air of, from a British perspective, otherness that I think is deeply important to the way that UK consumers, to use a horrible word, viewers, consume the product or understand the product. It broadens horizons. It makes you a more thoughtful and appreciative person, I think, following this race.
My two sort of big outstanding questions that come from this whole thing is, how are fans going to keep track of Gary Imlat's shirt choice post
It's a big
the
question.
tour?
Big question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a huge question. And then the other one that's just completely gone from my head. Oh, here we go. What happens to the theme tune?
I don't know who owns it, actually, but it's not going to pop up in the top 10 anytime soon, is it? Let's be honest.
It pops up
Maybe
in
the
my
campaign.
top 10. In my top 10 it is.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
that's
don't
the
know.
campaign.
I mean, I don't know whether Gary's just got plans he's keeping under wraps. So you couldn't rule out Gary launching his own brand of, man's got to live.
Yeah.
His own brand of kind of like maybe monikered polo shirts with little GI and a little crest. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If I were him, I'd be thinking about doing that.
Yeah, I'd buy one of those.
I'd buy one of those.
I'd buy one of
There you go.
those.
There's 3 right there, Gary.
Well, Ned, anyway, people will be able to find you. They will be able to find you on ITV this summer. They will be able to find you on podcast players with Never Strays Far, and that I'm sure will continue. You've got your book out, The Accidental Tour-ist. I'm sure there will be more books. I'm sure you probably got more live shows coming. Any other big plans that you want to let people know how to find Ned Boulting? Substack?
Substack is a hugely interesting thing that's just come into my life, and that gives me an opportunity to write stuff that nobody would want to publish. So it's great. A total freedom of expression. I love it. There is a big announcement in the wings, but it's not something I can talk about yet.
ITV's coming back. Right, Ned, thank you very much.
All right.
Enjoy your summer.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for the chat. Really enjoyed it.
Always, and when I say always, I mean very frequently, a really good guest. Great bloke. Very busy man. Probably soon to be less busy, but hopefully, as he teased, he will become more busy once again. Robyn, I've briefed you briefly, which is interesting.
Briefly briefed me.
No, we want your opinions on what is going to happen at the Tour de France. When this comes out, we're just over a week away from the Grand Depart. Do you have any crazy predictions, or not crazy predictions, apart from, I think Pogačar is going to win? Because I would guess that's what you're going to put in your predictions, which our official cyclist predictions will come out next Wednesday on cyclist.co.uk.
Maybe this time I'll actually get a prediction right.
I think you got Mats Pedersen at the Giro, actually.
Okay.
count.
Well, there we go. Yeah, just repeat that so everyone hears it clearly. I don't really have any crazy out there predictions, but one I'm really sort of looking forward to how he's going to go is Kevin
Eyes are
Vogtland
on Kevin.
from Arkea BNB. Yeah, I really think not necessarily a GC challenge, I don't think that at all, but potentially
Won a stage last year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he could realistically win 2 this year.
And probably bigger stages.
Just throwing
than
it out
that
there.
one.
Yeah, because the one, I feel like when you come into the Tour de France from a team like Arkea, people aren't necessarily expecting a lot of you, it's fair to say, because, it's all they'll go in the breakaway and then maybe they'll get one stage. But now, especially after his really good Tour de Suisse performance, there's just going to be more eyes on him. We're all looking at you. Don't get nervous about it. Don't get nervous about it.
I assume he's very deep in discussions, but he will be moving from Arkea for next season. So if he needs to earn himself
hopefully
a few
he's
more
not
quid or euros, won't hurt.
I was going to say, hopefully he's not going to do a Dries de Bois and
justice for
say that
Dries.
out loud and then get investigated by the Ethics
absolute
Commission.
I think I'm on the same wavelength. I think it's going to be a big year for French riders.
Nice.
I've not double-checked the start list, so this could be complete nonsense and none of them are actually doing the race. But if Romain Gregoire is riding, also a good Tour de Suisse, I think he's going to win the stage. I think Lenny Martinez is not going to be in the GC. He's been too hot or cold so far this season. But when he gets out of it early, he's not going to David Gaudu and be riding in back of the race every stage. You know, this guy's a real rider. He's going to win the stage. He could win a big mountain stage. You know, one of the ones when they get a little bit tired and UAE decide, actually, maybe we should probably let them have this one.
And they let him go, yeah.
It's quite tricky this year because it's one of those. So Lenny won the Mont Ventoux one-day race last year. And then you sort of look at the stages this year, obviously there's a lot that pack them in. But the Ventoux stages, it's all flat. And then there's the one climb, which kind of screams to me like, that's UAE it's going to be way too controlled.
You know how they're like, they want that stage to play out.
Yeah, it's just going to be like sprint.
Then it's like, that's it.
Yeah. Basically. They literally, it's like they designed it purely so the KOM could go. And people can be like, oh, it's crazy. What are they doing these days? And it's like, well, they're literally just climbing that climb. And it's basically pan flat. Like, come on, let's get in before the moaning. And just enjoy the spectacle, guys.
And I'm really excited for that last day, Will. I know you know how much I want to see a potential breakaway on the Champs-Élysées 1 year.
You are.
Could this year
for the
be
listeners,
the year?
Robyn is an historic hater of the processional final stage.
I mean, no, they have their place, don't get me wrong, but it's like once in a decade, I want to see something different. Not like a time trial, but yeah. Wait, hold on.
Maybe twice in a decade. This is different decades.
Yeah. It ended last year, and then this is the new decade.
So you want the breakaway? Listening. Do you want the breakaway to be Pogačar, or does that not count?
Yeah. I want the breakaway to be. I don't want it to be Pogačar. I want them to beat Pogačar. Because Pogačar will already have won the Tour de France. So, like, if he does this, it's like, okay, let someone else shine. So greedy.
I think what the organisers want is they probably want, like, Pogačar, Van der Poel, if he gets to the finish, Van Aert, kind of.
They want that stage one of the Dauphiné vibes. Was it stage one? Yeah, it was stage one.
Ridiculous day. RIP the Dauphiné. Get onto that one again. Gonna make me sad. I'm gonna cry. We've also had this week, and I don't know if I've even given you enough time to think about this, Robyn. The past couple of weeks, the UCI have got their grandpas round the table and have decided on a lot of things, a lot of rules that are being implemented that a lot of people, some they might agree with, mostly controversial. Mainly because the ones that people agree with kind of get swept under the surface. You don't really hear about them. But for a bit of positivity, you wrote about this week, women's races are being slightly reclassified with UCI points. So they're officially recognising Grand Tours and monuments for women's races, which I think is a good thing. Now, there is separate debates about which races should be classified as monuments in women's racing, but I don't want to get into the argument, actually. But there's also
removing yourself from it.
But there's also all the talk about bike restrictions, which is the controversial one. Anyway, so Robyn, I pose to you, is there anything that you think the UCI actually should be banning? What in cycling do you think the UCI and those guys should turn around and say, get lost?
If we're making it like, just worse and getting rid of like normal handlebar like distances for people, let's just go the whole hog and start racing on unicycles.
You know what?
Let's ban the back wheel.
I would love to see, they're really reducing time trials these days. Like if you look at the Wiggins Tour de France, it was like half time trials. Like, come on. What if we replaced time trial with a unicycle stage? Maybe just like
you know what the annoying thing is?
Pogačar would win.
I have seen Tadej Pogačar riding a unicycle and he would just win. Ridiculous.
God.
Ridiculous. What would you ban, Will?
I would ban the UCI, actually. No, I joke,
Fair enough.
but I think
And then it just cuts out.
Yeah, exactly. But I would, there's a lot of things that need to be going. I think what they really need to be focusing on, because they talk about safety for like gear ratios and things. I think, why are we not just looking at skiing? These guys haul themselves not off because they stay on, off mountains, and they're surrounded by netting.
Mhm.
Why aren't we just like netting off the climbs? And someone will be listening to this and be like, that doesn't work, that won't work, that's logistically impossible. But let's think about it. On those corners, like the Giro, when the Italian rider, that his name escapes me, but it was a very Italian name, slid off the side of the road and went down, what was it, like 12 feet? He was fine, which is great. But it'd be a big operation. But if there's a net there, no worry.
Would you put a net or more of a like padded
Yes.
barrier in?
That's the other thing. So I think ideally in the most dangerous ones, you want the padded barrier. But I think that would present a lot more of a logistical challenge and expense, I guess. And also, it's difficult because that part of a race is, you get the scenery in the background, looks really nice. You probably don't want a big padded barrier on all of them.
I'd take safety over scenery anyway. That's just me.
So true. Right.
That's so
I
true,
also
man.
think, and I think it was confirmed prior to us speaking, that young Oscar Onley is going to target stages at the Tour de France. And I think we can all agree that he is going to win a stage.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. I love Oscar Onley. I think it's so much fun to watch him on climbs.
I could watch him on the flats too.
Oh, fair enough. All right. Go one better, why don't you?
I'm actually looking forward to it. And our colleague, Ewan Wilson, he said, watching the Tour de Suisse mountain time trial, that stage of the Tour de France, which goes up to Périgueux, the little Altiport, I think they call it, will be, I don't know what his exact words were, but basically he wasn't looking forward to it because I think he basically thinks it's going to be a demolition. However, I thought that was really entertaining. And I always think those mountain time trials are highly underrated. When was the last mountain time trial you watched that didn't have some kind of surprise or drama?
Yeah, because I was just about to say, there was that one where didn't like Roglic's chain come off or something? Or like he hit a little din.
That was the Giro one that he won the Giro on.
Yeah, because that was crazy as well.
He won the race.
Yeah,
drama, and then he lost the other one at the Tour. The Tour de Suisse. Watching
what a
that,
mixed bag.
You go on for about 4 hours, and still Harry Sweeney is winning. I'm like, where's this come from?
Yeah.
And then obviously Almeida dominate that stage, and he'll probably be pretty good at the Tour de France. But here's my other opinion, and something that we'll probably see at the Tour de France. This is my last one because I'm probably rambling. I think we'll probably see that it's Almeida might kind of reverse this, but the Dauphiné, we sort of went back to the early Pogačar days of he was just sat on his own chilling out. I think it will likely go back to that at the Tour. I think it's going to be like, does the team actually matter? Because I think probably Pogačar is going to win without much support. But spoilers, I'm not actually going to say Pogačar. My official prediction is not going to be Pogačar.
Not putting your eggs in the Pogačar basket.
No.
Cancel him. Are you going for Vingegaard?
Yes.
Or are you going for Remco Evenepoel, just to be different?
I think that Visma are the kind of team to play their cards very close to their chest. And they didn't seem too disappointed at the Dauphiné. And
they did just release their team.
And it's probably exactly as you expect it to be, isn't it?
Let me have a look.
You know, they've got a good team. Obviously, they probably do a bit too much work, but they're going to make it hard. They'll be a bit disappointed that Von2 is not a big climbing day, but they've got other stages. He's got a really good time trial. We saw that at Dauphiné. And
So
I feel
here's
like
the,
he's
here's
also
the team,
the kind of guy
obviously.
that goes in slightly undercooked and rises into the race, which is what we saw at Dauphiné.
That's fair, that's valid. So we've got Vingegaard, Wout van Aert, Yates, brackets, Simon, Matteo Jorgensen, Eduardo Affini, Benoot, Kuss, and Campenaerts.
God, that's a bloody good team, isn't it?
Yeah, Jesus.
I think they're all right.
Yeah, I reckon that'll be good.
I'm
What do you know?
convincing myself more and more that Vingegaard is going to win. I don't know. I just want to see.
Yeah,
The thing that
okay.
annoys me, actually,
I want to see a fight.
and I do enjoy Tadej Pogačar, but you get the criticisms of like, oh, you know, Pogačar, Vingegaard make racing boring. Give me an example of a Grand Tour that Vingegaard's been at or ridden and won that has been in one of those boring races. Hasn't. Now, that's probably because he's not done, you know, a solo one. The only one I feel like he's done without Pogačar is probably the Sepp Kuss Vuelta, which was, it was good and bad in fairly equal measure. It's rather interesting.
I enjoyed it.
I know. And yeah, maybe he would dominate if he did, but we like to see the good riders going against each other. And while there is two, and if you look at our Facebook comments, they'll say, oh no, there's only one favourite for this race. I think it's going to be closer than it has been the past couple of years. I've taught myself into it now.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope there's a real good fight. I do not want to see one rider out in front by the final week. Or I'm going to be very annoyed.
On the final stage.
And they break away together.
And they hold hands over the finish line.
Written. It's written in the stars.
Yeah, no, I've definitely convinced myself now, actually. Okay, right. Well, all our listeners go, you're wrong. Please write to me and tell me that I'm wrong, either on social media or on our website or by email or a physical letter. All our addresses can be found on the internet. I'd very much enjoy that. And also, when our predictions come out next Wednesday, make sure to comment on that and say, Robyn, God, could have, you know, stuck your neck out a bit more.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Final thing.
I'll accept that.
So we normally predict the jerseys and an extra one. You're going to predict Pogačar, Philipsen, Pogačar, and Evenepoel. And you're going to put Vauquelin as your wild card.
Might change Philipsen.
It's going to be Tim Miller.
Yeah, you'll have to read it to find out.
Yes, great tease. All right, Robyn, thank you very much for joining me and Ned. Obviously, thanks very much to Ned. I'm sure you can keep an eye on Ned's summer because we will all be watching the ITV coverage, of course. And the theme tune that's got in my head now, I feel like we should be ending with the theme tune, but I don't actually know who has the rights for that, so I don't think we'd be able to get that.
That'd be so
Maybe
good.
Robyn,
yeah,
you can
I
sing
don't
it?
know. But just do 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 do. Oh, it's just so good, isn't it? It's so good.
Right. My hay fever is killing me.
Bye, Will.
Thank you very much, Robyn. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the Tour de France. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.